He was different from the very beginning, and everyone around him could feel it. He did not talk much, he did not play like other children, and he did not show interest in the things that excited kids his age. While others ran outside chasing balls and shouting in the sunlight, he sat quietly on the steps, tapping his fingers on his knees as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. His neighbors whispered about him every time he passed by. They said he lived in his own world, that he was strange, that something was wrong with him. His teachers tried to explain his behavior to his parents, saying that he was unfocused, slow, or distracted. But no one understood what was happening inside his mind. Because he never said it out loud, inside him, there were melodies. Soft ones, heavy ones, fast ones, and sad ones. They floated through his mind like tiny glowing lights. Filling his senses from morning until night, he heard music in the sound of the fan, the dripping of water, the banging of doors, even in the wind moving through the trees. Everything made a rhythm, everything made a pattern. But no one else could hear what he heard. Whenever he tried to explain, people laughed. They said he was imagining things. They said he was crazy. His own cousins teased him, calling him slow or useless, telling him he spoke nonsense. Every word they said left a tiny scratch on his heart, but he stayed silent. Because how could he explain something the world refused to hear? He started talking less. He stopped trying to show anyone what he felt instead. He learned how to hide his world of music deep inside himself. He walked through life like a ghost, moving quietly, living gently, trying not to disturb anyone. But every time he sat still, his fingers moved, tapping the melody in his head against his legs, tables, chairs, or even the air. His parents were worried. They loved him, but they did not understand him. They thought he needed to be more normal, more social, more active. Sometimes his father got angry and told him to stop being strange. His mother cried at night, thinking that their son would never fit in. They tried to talk to doctors, teachers, relatives, but no one could give them an answer. At school, things were worse. His classmates kept their distance. Some were afraid of him, thinking he was unpredictable or strange. Others mocked him openly, mimicking his quiet behavior or pretending to tap invisible keys like he did. He ignored them, not because he was strong, but because he did not know how to fight back. One day, during recess, a group of boys pushed him to the ground because he hummed a tune while drawing shapes in the dust. They laughed when he fell, saying, "Stop being weird." He just stood up, dusted his clothes, and walked away, but his eyes were filled with a sadness that no one noticed. Sometimes teachers asked him questions, hoping he would participate, but he would freeze, his mind filled with sounds. Not words, he knew the answers. He understood the lessons, but when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. The class laughed, the teacher sighed, and he shrank a little more inside himself. But even though the world misunderstood him, he was never empty inside. He always had music. It lived in him like breath, like heartbeat, like something that kept him alive even when everything else felt heavy. When he lay in bed at night, he listened to the soft, imaginary notes in his mind, melodies that comforted him more than any kind words had ever done. He dreamed of playing real instruments, but he had never touched one in his life. His family could not afford music lessons, and no one believed he had any talent anyway. They thought it was just another strange thing he imagined, something useless that would never help him in life. Still, every morning when he woke up, he heard a tune inside him waiting to be played. It followed him to school, it followed him home. It followed him even when he sat alone on the roof watching the evening sky. He often closed his eyes and moved his fingers in the air, pretending he was pressing piano keys, even though he had never seen a real piano up close. He wanted someone, anyone, to see the world through his eyes just once. He wanted someone to understand that he wasn't broken, he was simply different. He wanted someone to know that he wasn't crazy, He was full of music. But the world rarely understands quiet souls, especially children who do not act like everyone else, so he lived between two worlds. The outside one where people called him strange and misunderstood him, and the inside one where the most beautiful music played all day long. His life moved forward this way, quietly, softly, without applause or encouragement, just a little boy carrying the universe of sound within him, waiting for the day someone would finally hear it. And he had no idea that this strange gift inside him, the melodies, the rhythms, the sounds, would one day change everything. He did not know that the same people who ignored him, mocked him, and called him crazy would one day stand frozen in shock, unable to speak, their hearts trembling from the music he carried all along. He did not know it yet, but the world that misunderstood him was about to witness something unforgettable. His family tried to love him, but they struggled every day because they could not understand him. They watched him move through the house quietly, tapping his fingers on walls, tables, and chairs, creating rhythms only he could hear. At first they thought it was just a childhood habit, something he would grow out of, but as he grew older, the tapping became more constant, more intense, more connected to the invisible music inside him. His parents began to worry that something was wrong. His father sometimes raised his voice and told him to stop acting strange. His mother asked him again and again why he could not behave like the other children. They wanted a normal son, someone who could laugh loudly, play sports, and talk confidently. But he was none of those things, and the more they pressured him, the more he withdrew into his silent world. Some evenings, his father lost patience. He would sit the boy down and ask him to explain why he tapped his fingers all day. The boy tried his best to put the sounds in his mind into words, but when he opened his mouth, only confusion came out. His parents exchanged worried looks, thinking he was making it up, thinking he was lost in fantasies. Slowly giving up on ever understanding him, relatives visited often, and each visit brought its own discomfort. They compared him to his cousins, saying things like, "Why is he so quiet, and why doesn't he speak properly?" His mother forced a smile while hiding her embarrassment. His father pretended not to hear the comments, but deep inside, their hearts grew heavier. The boy, meanwhile, sat in a corner with his fingers dancing on his knees, trying to block out their voices with the music in his mind. His family started to treat him differently without realizing it. They stopped asking him questions, stopped involving him in conversations, stopped expecting anything from him. Meals became silent moments for him. He sat at the table but never felt part of the family. Everyone else talked and laughed, while he listened to rhythms in the clinking of spoons or the ticking of the clock on the wall. At school, he was misunderstood, but at home, he was invisible. His parents cared for him physically, but emotionally, they had surrendered. They believed he would always remain distant, always remain lost inside his own head. They never imagined that inside him lived something rare, something powerful, something waiting to be discovered. One evening, after another long day of being called strange both at home and at school, he stood in the backyard alone. The sky was dark, and the air was filled with a soft breeze that brushed against the trees as the branches moved. He heard a gentle rhythm, and without thinking, he raised his hands and started tapping again. The moonlight made his small hands glow as they moved through the air. His younger sister watched him from the doorway. Confused but curious, she asked him what he was doing. But he did not respond, not because he was ignoring her, but because he was too lost in the rhythm. She told their mother, who walked out and saw him moving strangely under the moonlight. Her heart ached because she did not know how to help him. She called him inside, but he did not hear her at first. The music inside him drowned out everything else. When he finally went inside, his father was frustrated again. They argued quietly in the kitchen, thinking he couldn't hear them. His mother said she was tired of trying. His father said he was embarrassed in front of others. They wondered if he would ever be normal. The boy heard every word, and each one cut deeper than any insult from school ever had. That night, he went to his room and sat on the floor near the window. He hugged his knees tightly, trying not to cry. The music inside him felt smaller that night, weaker, almost as if it was hiding from the pain he felt. He wished he could be normal, wished he could explain himself, wished someone, anyone, could understand. But he also knew he couldn't change himself. The melodies inside him were part of who he was. As natural as breathing, he stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat. Even though the world rejected him, one thing stayed with him: the music never left. It comforted him, whispered to him, reminded him that someday, somehow, he would find a place where he belonged. He did not know it yet, but a single moment in the future would change everything. The same child everyone misunderstood, the same boy his family had given up on, would soon shock them all. His gift was not gone. It was simply waiting for the right time to reveal itself, and the whole world would finally hear what he had been carrying inside him all this time. The day everything changed started like any other day. He woke up quietly, dressed slowly, and walked to school with his eyes on the ground. His fingers tapped small rhythms on his backpack as he walked, following the melody running through his mind. He didn't expect anything special to happen. He never did, because most days felt the same: lonely, silent, misunderstood. When he entered the classroom, a loud announcement came from the speaker. The school was hosting a talent activity day, and every student was allowed to show a skill in front of the class. Students cheered with excitement. Some talked about doing magic tricks, others planned to sing. Some boys whispered about doing funny dances. The whole room buzzed with noise, but he stayed quiet as always. His teacher began calling students one by one. Children showed their talents proudly. Some failed, some succeeded, and the class laughed and clapped throughout. When his turn came, the classroom suddenly grew quiet. Everyone stared at him, not with curiosity, but with confusion, disbelief, even annoyance. He walked slowly to the front of the class. His heart was beating fast, his hands trembling slightly. But something inside him pushed him forward, a soft, strong voice whispering that he had waited long enough. For a moment, he imagined the rhythm in his head becoming real, filling the classroom, making everyone understand him. But as he stood there with empty hands, the class burst into laughter. They thought he was joking. They thought he had no talent at all. "What will he do? Tap the air," one boy shouted. "He doesn't even talk properly," someone whispered. Another girl giggled loudly and said, "Sit down before you embarrass yourself." But he didn't move. He lifted his hands slowly, as if preparing to play an invisible piano. His fingers hovered in the air, following the patterns he had practiced silently in his room for years. But before he could even start, his teacher stepped forward with a sigh and told him to sit down. She didn't understand what he wanted to show, and she didn't believe it mattered. The class laughed again as he stepped back. Someone shouted, "Crazy boy," another student joked. "He hears ghosts." The harsh words fell onto him like stones, weighing down his small shoulders. His cheeks burned with shame. His heart squeezed tightly inside his chest. He looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would give him a chance. But all he saw were faces turned away, eyes rolling, hands waving him off as if he was a waste of time. Even his teacher looked disappointed, like she regretted calling his name. At that moment, something inside him cracked. Not the music, not the gift, but the small hope he had carried for so long. The hope that maybe today someone would understand him. The hope that maybe he wasn't as alone as he felt. But that hope faded in an instant, leaving only a quiet ache behind. He returned to his seat, but he didn't cry. Not because he was strong, but because he was used to this pain. He had felt it for years, and every insult, every laugh, every misunderstanding had built a wall around him. Today, that wall grew a little taller, a little thicker. The rest of the class went on. Kids continued performing, laughing, cheering each other on. No one remembered his attempt. No one noticed how quietly he stared at his hands, wondering why they didn't give him a chance when the final bell rang. He walked home slowly, even slower than usual. The sky was cloudy, and the wind felt cold on his face. But what hurt the most was not the cold. It was the feeling of being invisible, unwanted, judged for something he could not explain. On the way home, he passed by a music shop. The window displayed violins, guitars, drums, and a shining black piano. He stopped in front of that piano and stared at it for a long time. His breath fogged the glass as he pressed his hand against it gently, as if he was touching the keys from the other side. The music inside him grew louder, almost desperate, whispering that this instrument belonged to him. But he walked away slowly, knowing he couldn't afford it, knowing no one would ever buy it for him. Still, something inside him shifted. The humiliation from school became fuel inside his heart, a silent promise that one day he would show them the truth. One day they would hear what he had heard his whole life. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when. But he knew one thing clearly: the world had walked away from him today. But he would make them turn back someday. He would make them see the boy they ignored. And he would do it through the only voice he had, the music inside him. That day was painful. But it was also the beginning of something greater than he could imagine. He thought he had lost everything. But he didn't realize he had just taken the first step toward the moment that would leave them all speechless. Days passed after the embarrassing moment in class. But the pain stayed inside him like a quiet shadow. He tried to forget it, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the laughing faces of his classmates, the disappointed look of his teacher, and the way everyone turned away from him, as if he didn't matter. It hurt deeply, but something else also grew inside him. Something he didn't expect, a small desire to prove himself. One afternoon, when the school day ended and students rushed home to play or rest, he wandered through the silent hallways alone. His feet moved slowly without purpose, but his heart felt heavy with everything he couldn't say. He followed the quiet sound of wind passing through open windows until he reached a part of the school he rarely visited. There, at the end of an empty corridor, was a dusty old music room. The sign on the door was faded, and the room looked forgotten. He pushed the door open gently, and a soft creak echoed in the quiet space. The smell of old books and wood drifted through the air, and sunlight fell through a cracked window, lighting up the room in a warm, peaceful glow. His eyes slowly moved around the room, tracing the shapes of old drums, broken guitars, and boxes filled with folders no one had touched in years. But then he saw it, a piano sitting quietly in the corner, covered with dust, its black surface dull but still beautiful under the faint sunlight. His breath caught for a moment, and his heart began to beat faster. He walked toward the piano as if something was pulling him forward. His small feet made soft sounds on the wooden floor, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached out. When his fingers touched the piano's surface, a strange warmth filled his chest. He felt as if the instrument recognized him, as if it had been waiting for him all this time. He slowly lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys beneath it. Most of them were yellow from age, but to him, they looked perfect. He sat down on the old bench, which creaked under his weight, and placed his hands on the keys. His fingers hovered above them. Unsure, scared, excited, he pressed one key gently, and a soft note filled the room. It was imperfect and slightly out of tune, but to him, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. It was real. It wasn't just inside his mind anymore. It existed in the air, echoing softly against the old walls and filling the empty space with something magical. Tears gathered in his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling that he had finally found the place where he belonged. He pressed another key, then another. Slowly, a small, shaky melody formed beneath his fingertips. A melody he had heard in his mind for years. He closed his eyes and let the music guide him. His fingers moved slowly, then faster. Finding notes without knowing how he knew them, the room felt alive with sound, as if every dusty corner had been waiting to hear him play. The rhythm that followed him everywhere, in classrooms, hallways, at home, now had a voice. Hours passed without him noticing. The sun moved lower in the sky, the shadows in the room shifted, and the air became cooler, but he stayed there, playing everything his heart had held in silence for so long. It was the first time he truly felt free, the first time he felt seen. Even if no one else was watching, when he finally stopped, the room felt different, warmer somehow. He placed his hands gently on his lap and stared at the piano with deep gratitude. He whispered a soft thank you, even though he knew the piano couldn't hear him. It didn't matter, because for him, that old instrument had just changed everything. As he stood to leave, the door creaked again, and he froze. He thought he was in trouble. He thought a teacher would scold him for entering a room he wasn't supposed to be in. But it was only the janitor, an older man with kind eyes. The janitor looked at him for a moment and then at the piano, a small smile forming on his face. The boy thought he would be told to leave immediately. But instead, the janitor walked inside and said softly, "You can come here any time." He didn't ask questions, didn't laugh, didn't judge. He just gave a nod and quietly walked away, leaving the door slightly open. For the first time in his life, someone had given him permission to be himself. The music room became his secret world, a place where he could escape the noise, the judgment, the misunderstandings. Every day after school, he returned there, sitting at the piano, letting the melodies inside him flow freely. He didn't know it yet, but those quiet afternoons in the abandoned music room were shaping his future, strengthening his gift, and preparing him for a moment that would one day leave everyone who once ignored him completely speechless. Every afternoon after school, he slipped quietly into the abandoned music room. It became a place no one else cared about, but to him, it felt like a hidden world where he finally breathed freely. The moment he sat at the piano, it was as if the whole world faded away. All the noise, all the laughter from classmates, all the harsh words, all the misunderstandings, everything disappeared the second his fingers touched the keys. He taught himself without books, without lessons, without guidance. He followed nothing except the melodies inside his head. At first he played slowly, hesitantly, unsure if he was doing it right. But the more he played, the more confident he became. His fingers began to glide across the keys as if they had been waiting their entire life to do so. Some days he played soft, warm melodies that felt like a gentle hug. Other days he played sharp, fast rhythms that carried all his hidden pain. He poured every emotion into the piano: joy, fear, loneliness, hope, and somehow, the piano understood him better than any human ever had. The janitor often passed by and heard him playing, but he never interrupted. Sometimes he stood outside the door quietly, listening with a small smile. The boy never noticed him. He closed his eyes while playing, lost in a universe only he could see. The janitor would simply nod to himself and continue sweeping the hallway, keeping the secret safe. As weeks passed, his skill grew faster than he expected. His small hands moved gracefully over the keys, making the old piano come alive again. Even the dust on its surface seemed to tremble with each note he played. The music room, once forgotten and silent, now felt warm and filled with life. Sometimes he arrived early, eager to play the melody that had been echoing in his head all day. Other times he stayed until the sun set, creating his own little concert in the dim light. He never needed an audience, The piano was his only listener. And that was enough for him. His family still didn't understand him. They thought he wandered around the school alone. Wasting time, they noticed he came home later than usual. But they never asked where he went. Maybe they didn't want to hear the answer. Maybe they were afraid he would say something strange again, but he didn't mind anymore. He had something he never had before, a place where he belonged. Every key he pressed felt like a piece of healing. Every melody he played stitched together a part of his heart that had been hurt for years. The piano didn't judge him, didn't laugh, didn't call him crazy. It accepted him exactly as he was. One day, after playing for a long time, he stopped and looked around the quiet room. It felt different now, almost like a friend. The dust on the shelves didn't bother him. The cracked window didn't scare him. The rusty instruments didn't make him sad. Everything inside the room felt like it was meant for him, as if the space itself knew he needed it. He lifted his hands and looked at them carefully. His fingers were small, but strong. They had created something beautiful, something real. Something that lived outside his mind now. For the first time, he felt proud of himself. He felt like he wasn't strange or broken. He was simply a boy who carried too much music inside him. And now he had a way to let it out, as days turned into weeks. The melodies he played became more complex. He didn't know what musical terms meant. He didn't know chords or scales. He didn't know anything about reading music sheets. But he knew how to listen. He knew how to feel. And he knew how to express everything through sound. One afternoon, he played a melody so powerful it made his own eyes fill with tears. It was a mixture of sadness and hope, like a memory of being left behind, mixed with a dream of being discovered. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying every piece of him through the room. And when he finally stopped, the silence felt heavy and sacred. Suddenly he heard a soft clapping sound from the doorway. He gasped and turned quickly, expecting a teacher ready to scold him. But it was only the janitor, smiling kindly. The boy didn't know what to say. He just looked down shyly, ready to be told to leave. But the janitor said something simple, something that changed him inside. "You play like someone who was born for it," he whispered. Then he walked away, leaving the boy frozen with surprise and emotion. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. For the first time, someone believed in him. Someone heard him. Someone understood something about him that even he couldn't explain. That night, he lay in bed with his hands resting over his chest, feeling the echoes of the piano inside them. For once, he didn't feel alone. He didn't feel misunderstood. He felt like he was becoming someone different, someone stronger, someone who finally had a voice. He didn't know it yet, but his secret practice was preparing him for a moment that would change everything. The boy the world ignored was slowly becoming the musician the world would one day never forget. Weeks turned into months, and his secret life with the old piano continued. He practiced every afternoon, letting the melodies grow stronger and clearer. But outside that abandoned music room, the world remained the same. His classmates still ignored him. His teachers barely noticed him, and his family still believed he was trapped in strange habits. They had no idea that he was building something beautiful inside that dusty room. Something that would soon shock them all. One morning, his teacher made an announcement that created excitement across the classroom. The school was organizing a talent show at the end of the month. It would be held in the big auditorium, and students from every class were invited to perform. The moment the words "talent show" were spoken, the room exploded with noise. Children started shouting their ideas. Some planned dances, others prepared songs. A few joked about doing comedy. Everyone was filled with confidence. Everyone except him. He sat in the corner of the room, staring at his hands. His heart felt warm and nervous at the same time. A part of him wanted to stay hidden, to keep playing only in the empty music room where no one laughed at him. But another small part, a tiny brave piece of his heart, whispered that maybe this was a chance. Maybe this was the moment he had been waiting for since the day everyone walked away from him. When sign-up sheets were passed around the room, he hesitated at first. His fingers trembled. He could hear the voices of his classmates echoing in his mind, calling him strange, crazy, useless. But he also heard the sound of the piano keys, the melody that had saved him, the music that made him feel alive. He took a deep breath and wrote his name quietly. No one noticed. No one cared. They assumed he was signing up for something silly, but he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to play the piano, not invisibly in his mind, but out loud on the big stage. For the next 3 weeks, he practiced harder than ever. Every afternoon, he rushed to the music room, sometimes running so fast his backpack bounced behind him. He sat at the piano, closed his eyes, and imagined the auditorium stage, the lights, the audience, the silence before the first note. He imagined the moment he would play his heart out in front of the same people who had laughed at him. Sometimes he made mistakes, and frustration filled his chest, but he did not give up. He played again and again until his fingers found the right path, until every note matched the melody inside his soul. The janitor often watched from the hallway, impressed by how fast the boy was growing. The old man didn't say much, but he always left the door unlocked and the lights on, making sure the boy had a safe place to practice. The night before the talent show, he barely slept. His mind was racing between fear and excitement. He imagined walking on stage and freezing. He imagined pressing the wrong keys. He imagined the laughter returning, louder than ever. But then he imagined the music itself, pure and powerful, and it gave him strength. The next morning, the school buzzed with energy. Students wore colorful outfits, carried props, and chattered nonstop about their performances. Teachers hurried through the hallways preparing the auditorium. Parents arrived with cameras, smiling proudly at their children. He walked slowly through the crowd, feeling invisible as always, yet holding a secret stronger than his fear. When the talent show finally began, he sat backstage, knees shaking, watching performers go one by one. Some performances were funny. Some were loud, some were impressive. The audience clapped and cheered. The air felt warm with excitement. Then the teacher called his name. The room fell unusually quiet for a moment, as if everyone remembered who he was. The strange boy, the boy who never talked, the boy who once tried to show a talent and failed miserably. Whispers rose instantly. What will he do this time? Is he going to embarrass himself again? Why is he even here? He walked onto the stage slowly, his heart pounding so hard he thought the audience might hear it. The piano sat in the center, shining under the lights like a familiar friend waiting for him. He took a deep breath, sat down on the bench, and placed his shaking hands on the keys. A thick silence filled the room. People waited, confused, doubtful, bored. But in the middle of that silence, he closed his eyes and let the music inside him rise. He pressed the first key, then the second, and suddenly the entire auditorium filled with a melody so soft and beautiful, it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Every note he played carried a piece of his life, a piece of his loneliness, a piece of his pain, a piece of his hope. His hands moved faster, smoother, stronger. The melody rose and twisted, blooming into something powerful and breathtaking. The audience, who expected nothing from him, froze in stunned silence, but this was only the beginning of what he would make them feel. The moment he pressed the first few keys, the auditorium changed. People who had been whispering or looking at their phones slowly lifted their heads. The soft melody floating through the hall didn't sound like something a nervous boy should play. It sounded like something created by someone far older, someone who had lived through storms and still carried light in his heart. His fingers moved with a calm confidence he never showed in school. One key after another, his hands glided like they were telling a story. A story that had lived inside him for years. A story no one had bothered to listen to until now. He didn't rush, he didn't hesitate. The notes poured out naturally, like water flowing from a mountain spring, as the music grew stronger. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. Children stopped chatting. Parents lowered their phones. Teachers stilled in their seats. The same classmates who once laughed at him now stared in disbelief. Some blinked hard, trying to understand how the quiet boy they ignored could create something so beautiful. His teacher covered her mouth with her hand. She remembered the day she told him to sit down, thinking he had nothing to offer. But now she watched him play with a grace and emotion none of her best students had ever shown. Regret filled her heart. Mixed with awe, the melody changed, growing deeper, richer, as if it was carrying all the pain he had ever felt. All the moments when he was teased, all the times his family misunderstood him, all the nights he lay awake feeling unwanted, it all flowed into the keys, transforming sadness into something powerful and breathtaking. The music didn't ask for sympathy, it demanded respect. Some students who had mocked him in class felt their cheeks burn. They whispered to each other, but their voices trembled. One girl who had laughed loudly at him earlier that year now blinked back tears. She didn't understand why the music hurt, but it did. It made her heart feel something she couldn't explain. His parents sat in the middle row, unaware he had signed up for the show. When they saw him walk to the piano earlier, they thought it was a mistake. Now they watched with their hearts pounding. His mother's eyes filled with tears as she clutched her husband's arm. His father stared in shock, unable to speak. The boy continued playing, lost in the world only he could see. He didn't know how the audience reacted. He was too deep inside the melody. Every chord he struck felt like a burst of light. Every soft note felt like a confession he had waited years to express. Then the music shifted again, becoming gentle and warm. Like a sunrise after a long night, it was hope, forgiveness, freedom. It wrapped itself around the hearts of everyone in the room. Soft and healing, for a moment, the world outside that auditorium didn't exist. There were no bullies, no misunderstandings. No pain, only music, pure and alive. When he reached the final notes, the sound faded slowly, like a whisper disappearing into the wind. He lifted his hands from the keys, breathless, his heart beat fast. Not from fear, but from release. For the first time in his life, he had spoken without words. And the whole world had listened. There was silence, deep and complete. So strong that he wondered if he had done something wrong. He looked up nervously, wondering if they hated it. Wondering if they would laugh again, but then it happened. Someone stood. Clapping once loudly, then another person joined. And another, within seconds. The entire auditorium rose to their feet. The sound of applause filled the air. Louder than anything he had ever heard in his life. People shouted, cheered, cried. His classmates jumped from their seats, clapping wildly. His teacher wiped tears from her eyes, whispering, "I had no idea." His parents stood too. Stunned and emotional, his mother cried openly. His father blinked rapidly, trying to hide his shaking hands. They looked at their son like they were seeing him truly for the first time. The boy sat there, overwhelmed, unsure how to react. He had spent his whole life being ignored, misunderstood, treated like someone who didn't belong, and now, the same people who once walked away from him stood in awe, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. In that moment, he wasn't strange, he wasn't crazy, he wasn't invisible. He was extraordinary, and the world finally knew it. When the applause finally began to fade, he sat frozen on the piano bench, his small hands resting on his knees. His heart raced in his chest, not with fear, but with a strange warmth he had never felt before. For the first time in his life, people were looking at him not with confusion, not with judgment, not with pity, but with respect, admiration, and disbelief. He slowly stood up, unsure if he should bow or walk away. But the audience continued clapping, cheering, and calling his name. It felt unreal, like a dream he had once imagined but never believed could come true. The boy who spent years being ignored was now the center of the entire auditorium. As he stepped off the stage, his classmates rushed toward him. Students who once laughed at him now reached for his hands, telling him his performance was amazing. Some apologized with tears in their eyes. Others looked guilty and could barely speak. He didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded shyly, his heart still trembling from the music. Then he saw his parents pushing through the crowd. His mother reached him first, wrapping him tightly in her arms. Her tears wet his shoulder as she whispered again and again, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand." His father placed a hand on his back, his voice shaking as he said, "Son, you're incredible." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The warmth in their embrace told him everything he had wanted to hear his whole life. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. Like he wasn't a burden or a mystery anymore. Like he was something to be proud of. The teacher walked toward him with her hands clasped together. Her voice trembled as she apologized for not seeing his potential earlier. She promised to help him grow, to guide him, to make sure he never felt invisible again. He nodded quietly, accepting her words with a humble smile. The janitor stood near the back of the auditorium, watching everything with a proud, gentle smile. He didn't step forward to take credit. He didn't announce that he had seen the boy's talent long before anyone else. He simply lifted a hand in a small wave. The boy saw him and smiled back, a silent thank you passing between them. The school announced that he had won first place. Not because they felt sorry for him, not because he was different, but because he had created something truly powerful. His performance wasn't just good for a child. It was something that made grown adults stand up. Something that touched hearts, something unforgettable. As he walked out of the auditorium that day, everything felt different. The hallways no longer felt heavy. The classrooms no longer felt like prisons. The world outside didn't feel cold. Instead, everything felt brighter, warmer, alive. The next day, students greeted him with smiles. Some asked him to teach them simple melodies. Some asked him how he learned. He didn't have an answer. He only knew that the music had always been inside him, waiting to be heard. Teachers encouraged him to join music clubs, competitions, and special programs. His parents bought him a small keyboard, the first instrument he ever owned. He practiced on it at home late into the night. The same melodies he once kept hidden now filling the house with warmth. But he still returned to the old music room after school. The piano there held his secrets, his pain, his dreams. It was the first friend he ever had. The first place where he was truly himself. He played new melodies every day. Each one stronger, braver, more beautiful than the last. Sometimes the janitor would sit inside and listen quietly. Sometimes he would leave the boy alone to let the music fill the room. Either way, the boy knew he wasn't alone anymore. Months passed, and his name slowly spread beyond the school. A video of his talent show performance, recorded by a parent, began to circulate online. People from different cities watched it, praising the quiet boy with the heart of a pianist. Messages of encouragement flooded the school. And all of this happened because he refused to stop listening to the music inside him. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who was called crazy, the one who was ignored, mocked, and dismissed. He felt a deep sadness for that boy, but also pride, because he never gave up. He realized now that he was never strange. He was never broken. He was misunderstood. Yes, but not lost. The world just didn't speak his language. Not until he showed them through music one afternoon. As he sat at the piano in the empty room, he whispered softly to himself, "They finally heard me. And he knew this was only the beginning. The boy everyone once walked away from was becoming someone the world would one day remember. He closed his eyes, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play again, not for applause, not for recognition, but simply because music was who he was, and who he would always be.